All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Sacred Flame podcast. I'm Amina Otto,
And I'm Matthias Nordvig.
and we are going to talk about the Wild Hunt in a big way today. So
Ooh.
buckle up.
A big way.
A big way. This is a topic that I cannot stop talking about. It's one of my favorite things to discuss. It's a phenomenon that's really fascinated me for decades.
Are you gonna make me say saggy long titty again?
Pendulous breasts, Matthias.
Pendulous breasts. I keep we keep coming up on some kind of weird topic that has something to do with long saggy breasts or something else, and people keep like messaging me back and like what's going on, man? What is all this about? I see
Well,
somebody
we're gonna
like
talk about
mentions it and I keep saying we are a serious podcast.
we are
We
such a
don't.
serious podcast that we can even be serious about saggy long tits that have to be flung over the shoulder if you're running away from hunters.
Yes, exactly. So buckle up, everybody.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. So, okay, Amina, what's up with the Wild Hunt?
Oh gosh, what isn't up with the Wild Hunt? I've managed to mention it in almost every episode that we've done so far,
Hmm.
and it's because it's just so prevalent and relevant to so much of what we talk about. It's basically the Wild Hunt is shorthand for a massive corpus of tales, legends, mythologies, and traditions that basically have to do with ghost riders in the sky. That's the criteria for a wild hunt. Spectral riders that ride across the sky, usually mounted on horsemen, but it can be everything from a procession of the dead to a ride of spirits to a sort of demonic host that's chasing or being chased or pursuing a specific quarry or is cursed to wander. And it touches on so many other legends and folklores and mythologies that it's kind of hard to disentangle it from any of these things that we're talking about when it comes to Northern traditions. And it's
Mm,
especially relevant at this time of the year. So there's
yes.
no end to things that can be said about the Wild Hunt. But Ghost Riders in the Sky is the big one.
And as soon as you say things like Riders in the Sky, Man of War starts playing in the back of my head,
Yes,
especially
and I'm
Wheels of
sure,
Fire.
yep, I'm sure Johnny Cash starts playing in a bunch of other people's head. Although he was not the
Yes.
original one to sing that, and I feel terrible that I can't remember the original artist for the proper American version of Ghost Riders in the Sky. But yeah,
Oh,
there's
I wouldn't know. You're the one from Wyoming, so
I'm not from Wyoming.
well, you're from the Midwest.
I'm so offended. Yeah, so there's so much to be
I
said
was
about
trying to
that.
give you some cowboy creds here.
No,
Like,
I don't want cowboy cred. You're the one with the boots and the hat and the buckles.
don't tell anybody. Come on.
Oh, but yeah. Oh gosh, it's hard to even know where to start. Also, I apologize if you can hear the sounds of fireworks. It is bonfire night in the UK, and it has been nonstop for the last 3.5 hours.
Well, please tell us what that's all about.
So, in 1605, Guy Fawkes tried to blow up the Houses of
Oh.
Parliament in London. And so, to commemorate that act of domestic terrorism, everyone lights giant bonfires and sets off fireworks. And there's a fun little rhyme that goes with it, which everyone who's seen V for Vendetta will remember.
Mm. And then what? I haven't seen that
Oh
movie.
gosh. It's, remember, remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot. I see no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot, I think.
Mm. All right. All right. Yeah, so okay, so you're celebrating terrorism in the
Yeah,
UK.
we're celebrating terrorism.
Oh, cool.
And it's they go really hard here in Glasgow.
Mm-hmm.
And they bring out the big guns. And
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very distracting when trying to record a podcast, so I apologize for the diversion.
Is it
But
is it is it even comparable to the Wild Hunt,
I was
perhaps?
going to say it probably is because the Wild Hunt is notorious for being noisy and destructive. So I think
Mm,
around this time of year, you've got so little daylight, it's cold, it's dark. People just want to light things on fire and make a lot of noise to feel something.
hmm.
And so I imagine that's a bit of what's going on.
Is there a little bit of like I don't know, Odin to Guy Fawkes here? Like I'm just thinking like with the mask and everything. Like
Ooh, yeah. Well,
yeah,
arguably, you could make a case for some Loki going on with
that
Guy
too.
Fawkes and
Yes,
his
yeah.
his fire tendencies, his subversion of authority. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, definitely a bit of Odin, his
Mm.
craftiness, his active terrorism.
Okay, so we have now established that Odin is a terroristic
Odin is a
god.
terrorist. You heard it here first. He's also sometimes, according to especially Jakob Grimm, the leader, the indisputable leader of the Wild Hunt. Although
Exactly.
he goes with the Germanic form of Wotan or Woden
Hmm.
as the foremost leader of Oskuraya, the Wild Hunt.
Yeah, so this is something I feel like we should unpack because Grimm has a grim tendency to just just like say that like certain like folktale motifs are pretty much the same as certain mythology motifs and
Yeah.
lumping people together. Like so for any listeners here, if you've ever heard this idea that Frigg and Freya is the same, you can thank Jakob Grimm for that because he's the guy who wrote that in 1835.
Yes.
There's no like reasonable basis for just like saying that.
No.
There's ways in which you can make it probable based on etymology primarily that there is some kind of like deep link between these two female deities, um, but this is where uh, some people have taken liberties with what has been said about that subject early on. So, is there anything we should be aware of here when the good Grimm says that about Odin?
Yes, he does, as you said, have a tendency to sort of lump things together. So he is a linguist, first and foremost. He did not start his career as a folklorist or a student of literature, any of that. So he kind of just shotguns all of his linguistic learning onto his collection of folk tales from Germany and the greater continental Europe. And that's really important to keep in mind when looking at his studies. And once you understand that, he becomes a lot more valuable of a source, but you also realize that you can't really take everything that he says at face value. So he's excellent at amassing a lot of information that is probably somewhat connected, but the way in which he draws connections in that kind of data soup is not always the most sound.
Mm,
So he loves this idea that Wotan, Woden, Odin is the leader of the Wild Hunt. And then from there, he kind of jumps off into saying, and so the Wild Hunt must have to do with Valkyries, and it must have to do with the riding from Asgard. And he makes all of these kinds of like logical leaps that then become tradition because they are just related enough to enough local traditions to sound quite plausible.
hmm. And that's when you get the whole
And that's when Wagner
yes,
just takes it
yes,
and runs with it. So
yes,
it's
yeah.
it's also important to keep in mind that a lot of this was rooted in that wave of nationalism where everyone was collecting their own local folk tales and throwing their history and traditions back as far as they possibly could on very shugly grounds to kind of lay claim to their own lands and all of these quite young, freshly established national identities. So again, keeping that in mind is really important when approaching researchers like Grimm.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
Okay, so having said that,
mhm.
what is wherein do we find the reasonable aspects of all this stuff when it comes to this this guy?
So it's this guy being Grimm,
Grim,
or
yes.
yeah.
And
So
Odin, I guess.
yeah, there's this one researcher whose work I'm quite fond of called Ronald Hutton, and he takes a really interesting three-pronged approach to the Wild Hunt, where he couches Grimm's material in very reasonable terms, and he seems to approach it as like this is like we can thank Jakob Grimm for amassing all of this information, and he makes all of these logical leaps that I don't necessarily agree with, but thank you for putting all of this together in one place for us, which is a good way to approach Grimm's stuff. And Hutton takes kind of a three-pronged approach to the hunt where and I'm more inclined to just to agree with Hutton in this, where he disagrees with Grimm, who really, really wants there to be this big myth of the hunt from which all other traditions
Mm.
are sort of branches of or derivatives of or corrupted versions of. And Hutton says that's very unlikely, and these are probably things that evolved independently but in related ways to deal with similar natural phenomena, if that
Oh,
makes sense.
interesting. What are the
So kind
natural
of
phenomena then?
so it would just be like a seasonal thing
Hmm.
or a way of dealing with changing attitudes to death with the advent of Christianity in
Oh.
early medieval times. And throughout. So it kind of transformed from a lot of interaction with ancestors and honoring the dead in a certain way to taking on maybe a more supernatural, demonic, witchy cast after the conversion in various
Mm.
different places. And this was by no means a unanimous phenomenon, but it's one of the theories that he posits as what may have happened and why we have so many different traditions that have spectral riders appearing in the sky around autumn, winter, and, being loud, causing damage to farms and homesteads, knocking on doors, interacting with people, and generally being sometimes quite rowdy. Sometimes they're benevolent, but more of the myths seem to have them be quite mischievous and destructive.
Yeah, I mean, we have plenty of folk tales from Scandinavia that have that motif, right? Now, we talked about that in an early episode, right? The
Yep,
invasion of the trolls is
exactly.
the most common one, and they come into the house and basically expel the people who live there and then do crazy things, right? And from Southern Germanic traditions, I guess we can call them, down in the Alps, right? We have the
Hmm.
Krampus phenomenon, right?
Hmm.
Who, by the way, like the in those, what do they call them? Krampusläufen, right? Um,
Yeah,
yeah, we have these,
yeah, the
uh,
Krampus run.
yeah,
Yeah.
we have these demonic figures, right? The local villages, especially the
Hmm.
boys, dressing up in big demonic looking suits, and then they run around. And one of the things that we've seen historically is that somebody who perhaps needs to be put in their place in
Hmm.
the community is then subjected to a lot of mischief, right? Maybe even burning down their barn once in a while. It really depends on what they need to be learning here, right?
Yes,
So is this
absolutely.
like is so first and foremost, we have to, if you ask me, we have to inquire about the carnival traditions, right? Like there's something
Yeah,
very carnivalesque about all of
there
this.
is.
And then secondly, I think we should also consider the regulatory phenomenon involved here, right? Like and this is what we see in carnivals, regardless of the season. There can often be, I mean, there's a reason that there aren't that many carnivals left in Europe. That's because they were like banned,
Yeah.
outlawed by kings who otherwise at other times before they banned them, sometimes found themselves running from torches and pitchforks, right? Because that's how a carnival can also evolve into an actual riot.
Yeah,
Speaking of Guy Fawkes.
absolutely. Yes. And I think you've touched on a really interesting aspect of this idea of carnival because carnival so often involves a procession. And that procession is usually an inversion or a perversion of the norm. So you have
Yes.
Dia de los Muertos in Mexico and other Latin traditions there, which is a procession of the dead, which usually
Mhm.
happens around the day after Halloween,
Hmm.
so the 1st of
And
November.
you
And
know, highly sexualized Mardi Gras, right?
exactly. Yes, Mardi Gras is
Yeah.
another example. In Japan, you have I think it's called the Parade of 100 Demons,
Hmm.
which is very similar, where everyone dresses up in crazy masks and they have like noisemakers, and they basically do something very similar to a carnival procession or a Campusläufen, where they just make a lot of noise and they're kind of like engaging with the a spiritual possession. I can't remember if it might include the dead as well. So it's this kind of combined uh, otherworld spirit and ancestral procession, but I don't know very much about that Japanese tradition, so
Mm.
don't quote me on that.
But
But
no, I
yeah, you
think
see it all over the shop. Yeah.
yeah, and I was just like going back to like the Rio Carnival, right? Like
Hmm.
we're talking about a tradition in a up until recently very strict Catholic country, right? Where like the carnival itself is literally known for the skimpiest dresses, outfits that you can
Oh,
find,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And that's the whole point too, right?
Yeah.
That is the point. The nudity is the point because like
Mhm.
we are so very Catholic and religious, and we don't normally do that, but this is the time to do that. So that would be like one of those examples of that inversion, right? And
Yeah, exactly. Where it's encouraged to be kind of expressive and sexual and cast off
mm,
that kind of Catholic repression.
yeah.
And that's part of honoring this tradition.
And
Uh,
that's also what reinforces the tradition itself, what we call the repressive tradition, right? The
yes.
the fact that this is um, we get to do that thing once a year, so the rest of the time we can live with being pious, or something like that. That's
Yeah, exactly. It's
yeah,
kind of get all of your yayas out so that, it's Mardi Gras, it's Fat Tuesday, and then comes Lent. And that's
yes,
when you have to be your most repressed and your most stuck up, and you have to
Only
mash
fish for
everything
you.
back. Oh.
You don't like fish?
I'm I think I'm still hung up on that story of the fish burger you told me about 10 minutes ago.
Oh, okay. Okay. Because I'm like um I mean I was just in Seattle, and like for the first time because we went out to the peninsula, the Olympic Peninsula, and then came back, and for the first time in about 10 years I found myself on a sailing vessel of some kind.
I saw your
And
your videos from
I
that.
was I was so happy.
You look like, and I mean this in the nicest way, you look like when a puppy puts its head out the window and gets all the wind in its face. You were making that same exact face when
That
you
is
were
that
on the
that was
boat.
exactly how I felt.
Just so excited. Oh,
Okay, so
yes.
yeah, and that's another thing that we should keep in mind with the carnivals, right? Um, this is also where you have like in May traditions or like early spring traditions or in the harvest traditions, you
Mhm.
you you like elect a May King or Harvest
Yeah.
King, that kind of stuff too, right?
Mhm.
So all of this stuff seems to like fall into exactly those, um, these very like uh, otherworldly. I think
Yeah,
they
this
are
kind of
otherworldly
still
traditions.
kind of a procession. And that's another one of the proposed origins of this Oscaraya wild hunt tradition is visitations by processions of usually female spirits who were benevolent. So they would come
Mm.
and visit the houses of their favorite people and bestow gifts or health or whatever on their preferred mortals and sometimes invite those mortals to go along with them. And that's
Oh,
also where you get these traditions of witches riding with spirits.
ah, I
So
see.
that's, yep, specifically female witches riding with
So tell me
female
more about
owners.
these female spirits that come and visit because I am not super familiar with those traditions. Where do we see
So,
them?
uh, Hutton identifies a tradition that's kind of rooted in Greek and Mediterranean stuff,
Hmm.
where Hecate or Diana, or one of those female deities, would lead her attendants basically and go around and sweep up her favorite ladies and invite them to join her on this ride or this procession. And then that kind of transformed into traditions where different it could be you could be led by different female spirits. So in Wales, you have this tradition of a lady called Machdi Nos or Matilda of the Night, who is just
Mm,
this very powerful immortal sorceress who would go around and she has this big parade, and sometimes she's sometimes described as very, very ugly and old, and sometimes described as quite beautiful. And she has a procession of otherworldly spirits, and she would visit mortals. This is also where you start to see kind of early modern traditions of Queen Mav
mm,
or May Queen processions or fairy parades. You can see this all the way down to like Tolkien's chapters on the passing of the elves, this kind of otherworldly procession that is benevolent.
mm,
And so
hmm,
this also isn't as attached to seasonality as the other aspects that we see in wild hunt traditions, which is usually procession of diabolical spirits or procession of the dead. So this isn't tied to any specific season, but as you said, it could be recreated in May traditions or harvest traditions. And you sometimes hear a lot of midsummer fairy processions in places like Ireland,
mm,
where Midsummer or May Day, Beltane, are two times where you would have a lot of like fairy interaction.
mm. That sounds like something straight out of Harry Potter, really.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I mean, there's a whole like explosion of scholarship on this that kind of relates this to traditions in, I think, northern Italy of I think they're called the Benandati or the
Oh,
Benandata.
hell yeah, the Benandanti.
Yeah,
Yes. Okay,
yes.
so
And
this is
this
now it's getting
idea of
interesting.
yeah, so this kind of like shamanic tradition of sending yourself out to ride with these
Hmm.
spirits. There was a really interesting article that I read for the talk I gave at Midgardsblot on the Wild Hunt called "On the Backs of." It's like on the backs of certain beasts or on the backs of various beasts, but it's taken
Mm,
from this little snippet of literature that's describing like witches' parades or the witches, basically how witches get to their witches' sabbaths,
hmm.
where they ride with their familiars, usually on the backs of black goats or dogs or horses, sometimes
Hmm.
wolves.
A
So
pig
it's
once in a while.
yeah, sometimes a pig,
Hmm.
sometimes
That's especially a Danish thing, of course.
riding on pigs.
Yeah, yeah, like the country that has like 5 million people and 25 million pigs
Oh,
and
there you go.
supplies
Yeah,
most
I
of
mean,
Europe with pork. Of
they're
course,
just
there's also
available.
folk tales
Yeah,
about that kind of stuff, right? Like,
of course.
um, Oh yeah, so let's get back to the Benandanti. For those who are not familiar with them, that's like an uh you know like a sect in northern Italy that, during the witch hunts in the 15, 1600s was like very much targeted for witchcraft.
Yes, they were heavily
Um
persecuted.
yeah, but it was really fascinating folk tradition of transcendental ritualism essentially,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and also since we are in that realm talking about the Black Sabbath and all that stuff, let's also keep in mind that ideas of the Black Sabbath, this location that you go to, either, it really depends on the local tradition where um where sort of what you could call clergy interpretations have mixed with local folk tradition, right? It really depends on where people go, right? So originally, all of this stuff comes from that area of northern Italy, southeastern France,
Hmm.
southwestern Germany, with Switzerland and Austria in between. That whole area, that's where we find the folklore basis for stuff about like the Black Sabbath and hanging out with the goat guy, being
Yeah.
naked witches in the woods, eating babies, all that stuff, right? That's all synthesized by Heinrich Kramer and Jakob Sprenger, right? These two witch hunters in the late 1400s in the Malleus Maleficarum, the witch's hammer, as it is called, where they basically take this folklore material and also references to Diana and such, and
Yep.
then they overcoat it with references to scripture and then theological argumentation. And so, one of the things that we need to keep in mind, right, is that like the idea of the witches' Sabbath is not like a standard thing in just European folklore all around. This is something that's introduced into
Yeah.
European folklore in the 1500s, and like because the Witch's Hammer is actually one of the books that is most massively produced with the printing press, right?
Hmm.
It goes the Bible, anti-Semitic propaganda, and the witch's hammer. Okay. So
Great start for
yeah,
the
it's a
printing
great
press.
start. It's almost as if, social media is the same thing all over again, isn't
Yep.
it now? Yeah. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Um, but so what happens next, right, is that this material is introduced out there in all of these communities in Poland, all over Germany, places in France and Italy and Spain, Hungary,
Mhm.
Austria, Scandinavia, right? And then they mix with local folk traditions, right? So that's why we have in Germany we have this idea of like the witches gathering at Blocksberg, right? As this mountain, a specific mountainous location, and I think it's in Hudson. That's where we find Scandinavians going to vacation in Germany
Mhm.
nowadays. At least we have traditionally gone to Hudson, not for witches purposes, but for vacation. Um,
Sure.
and like, yeah, sure. In Sweden and a little bit in Denmark, the tradition has been blåkulla, right? Which that's the Swedish version, blåkullen in Danish. Some Norwegian traditions also mention that location. That literally means the Black Mountain, which is somewhere up north in Scandinavia. Some Norwegian traditions have Dovre as a location for it. Dovre in modern Norwegian. Um, but that's very sort of like that's distinctly Scandinavian versions of it. And then you also have like local versions where like there's some Danish versions where the witches don't gather somewhere far away from where we're at. They actually gather in the church. That's like a very distinctly
Oh,
Danish tradition. Yes.
that's
It's like,
bizarre.
oh yeah, no, we expect weird shit to happen in the church, man.
I guess, yeah.
And local
Seems a
French
bit
tradition.
counterintuitive. Yeah.
It would, wouldn't it? But then
But
again, the subversive aspect of it,
yeah,
right?
exactly. That
Yeah.
subversion. In England, you just have people gathering at different houses of, these evil women. So they
But
kind
that's
of take
again also
turns.
subversion, right? Like
Yes.
because like what's more safe or what is supposed to be more safe than your house, right? The only
Then
other
a home,
thing, yeah, the only other thing that's safe is the church or more safe, so
right?
to speak, right? And so, this is also why you get in Anglophone traditions the idea of the hallowed ground that cannot be
Yes.
entered. We see this in, so much folk horror and, ghost stories, right? Like once you're in the church, you're safe,
You're safe.
except
Vampires
of
can't get
course,
you.
yeah.
Demons can't get you. Witches can't get you unless you're Danish.
Well, so that's the thing is like if that or if the headless horseman has fashioned some kind of lasso to catch you with, right? Like, and that's what he does in the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, at least the
Yep.
Tim Burton version, right? But yeah, in Denmark, you're screwed either way. Like if you try to seek refuge in a church, you might actually run straight into the coven.
Yeah, in Iceland and I think a few places in Denmark, in Scandinavia, you have to just completely vacate your farmhouses and sleep in the outhouses,
Hmm.
lest the spirits descend and want to inhabit your place. So
Yeah.
again, this idea of invading these places that should feel safe, such as homes or churches or,
Hmm.
community gathering places, you have to just kind of give them up to the spirits,
Hmm.
and woe betide you if you don't.
Yeah, and that's like the interesting thing about like how creative these folk traditions have been with the inversion aspect, because the original inversion is of course the one that we know from northern Italy and the French area, right? Is this idea that witchcraft and whatever these witches are doing, well, first and foremost, they don't gather in the building. They don't gather in the church that's designated for worship of God. They
Yes.
gather out there in the woods, in nature,
Yes.
right?
Away.
So, yeah,
Not in civilized places.
exactly, in the uncivilized places. And to add on to this uncivilized savagery, right? Then they don't worship a man, a human being. They worship a monster, right?
Mhm.
That's what the goat man is. He's a
Yeah.
monstrosity, right? He's a mix of animal and human.
Yeah.
That's
And that goes
subversion.
back to a lot of the Bacchanalia traditions where you'd
Hmm.
have these frenzied crowds of women running with fawns and satyrs
Hmm.
and completely giving in to their less civilized natures.
Hmm.
So that's, yeah, which
The
is again where a lot of this imagery and ideas for these traditions do come from.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean it also seems like it's been a very consistent theme throughout Europe. It's not just located in the Mediterranean, the Dionysian traditions, the
Yeah,
Liberalia, all
it's
that kind of stuff, and not just
absolutely.
exclusive to the Mediterranean. And it would
Mhm.
make a lot of sense because they were incredibly popular too, right?
Yes,
So they've definitely crept
everyone wanted
northwards
to
as well,
have orgies, so
right? Like I mean,
like but yeah,
um,
and you see that all over the place. It's like it,
yeah.
it gets quite far north and it still survives in a lot of these, like even in something like the Krampus run, where
Hmm.
you have this blending of human and animal and this procession aspect and this kind of like frenzied ecstatic state that's really a part of this and that is tied to traditions of the Wild Hunt as well.
Yes, and then we also get like, and this is where we come back to this the animals, right? Because
Hmm.
then we have at Christmas time the goat guy who shows up with gifts, right?
Hmm.
Like, we have those folk tales about, as I mentioned, there are like Danish folk tales about like riding pigs,
Riding
and
pigs.
yeah, and one of them
Um,
is, or a couple of them are actually like sort of maybe more warnings against doing that or trying that with a pig that has such a sharp back that it cuts you in half.
Ooh,
It's like, oh.
no, thank
Um,
you.
yeah, and the hell horse, of course, right?
Oh yeah.
Um, Nøkken that shows up as the hell horse,
Hmm.
which is like a three-legged horse with one leg in his mouth, and then you can ride his back, and its
Yep.
back gets longer and longer, depending on how many people get on it.
Oh
And then it
gosh, I
takes you
haven't heard
straight
of
into the
that.
bog. It just
Yeah,
fucking
no, the
drowns you.
water horses I mean, we've got kelpies here in Scotland, which are very
Hmm.
popular, but which are almost an exact cognate of the Nook or the Nooker.
Hmm.
And I don't know if they have the tradition of the very long back, but they do have the tradition of luring people into bogs and drowning them. They're really creepy. I don't know why, but this also to go back to the idea of a three-legged horse with one leg in its mouth, we have a lot of horse and horseman decapitation and mutilation going on in these traditions as well. And Grimm identifies a lot of them. And reading his tallying of them is really funny because you basically have like a horseman, a headless horseman, uh like headless horse, but the man has its head. And then sometimes the man and the horse can both be headless, and sometimes they're carrying their heads, and sometimes they're carrying other bits of themselves. And it gets very messy.
It does.
And but it's this idea of kind of we I think we spoke about this a bit in our first episode, where this whole thing of decapitation and riding around with heads was kind of a popular thing in
Hmm.
a lot of pre-Christian cultures, especially, and that was kind of they got really heavily chastised for that by not only Christianity, but well before that by a lot of classical cultures as
Yeah, the
well.
Romans were not down with it. It's
They
actually
were
like
not down with that.
no, and that's one thing we should keep in mind when it comes to like you know the stuff that many of those like cardinal morality issues that we see in modern day Christianity. I mean, they come straight from pagan Roman
Yeah,
tradition,
absolutely.
really.
Yep.
Um,
No,
you know,
they did not like the head hunting.
they did not like the headhunting. They were definitely not down with human sacrifice like everybody
Nope.
else was at the time, you know. It's just not their thing.
It's just really
And
not their thing. Yeah, they're highly
yeah,
critical.
yeah. And in the same way as like Romans liked to drink wine, they
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
But
they
the
were
Celts
not.
like to drink this nasty stuff called corvu or corva,
Oh yeah, yeah.
which they didn't even have a word for it, so they had to borrow it from Greek and
Mm,
Egyptian.
yeah.
Yeah. So, oh
And and
gosh, so I've spent
and
a lot
then
of time talking about Celtic beer versus Roman wine recently.
which I probably would also go with the Roman wine.
Yeah, the way they describe it doesn't sound very nice. They're like, it's nasty grain water, and
Yep.
it gives them a thick head the next day.
Hmm. I
So,
mean, and let's keep in mind before the Reinheitsgebot, which is actually also very weirdly entangled in the whole witchcraft thing. But
yes,
before the Reinheitsgebot in Germany, that was like the purity law for beer. Yeah, beer was some weird kind of soup.
yes,
It
yes,
was not the golden flowing liquid that we know it today.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Anyway, um, so I guess one thing that we haven't really addressed about the whole wild hunt thing, and I'm kind of like cranking a hard left here, is
Hmm.
the aspects that make it an actual hunt. And
Mm.
those come strongly from the British traditions. And that's where we get like these crazy dogs, these crazy horses, these huntsmen pursuing stuff, which you would do also see in quite a few continental
Mm.
traditions.
Oh,
Um,
that
Hunting
brings.
horns.
Sorry,
Yes.
I have to like just
What?
ask you
No,
about one
tell
thing.
me.
Have you run into Russerova in Norway, Norwegian tradition?
No, I have not.
Okay, so she's part of Oskorea. As far as I
Ah.
remember, like the Scandinavian peninsula. So,
Oh,
um, she's like a
hang on.
beautiful woman from the front, and then she's got a horse's ass from the back.
This is sounding familiar. I don't know if I'm thinking of Grillo or Grilla or Lissa,
It could
but
also
that's
be one of her names.
yes, but there's also this woman who sometimes appears with the hunt or sometimes leads it, who has she's usually some kind of troll woman, but she has like a big long tail and
Hmm.
weird hair,
Mm.
and
It doesn't
sometimes the
sound too
leader
bad. Like
doesn't sound
weird
terrible,
hair and a
like
long tail is
we
like,
can
well, at
overlook
least it's
that.
not a horse's ass.
Yeah, nobody's perfect. Just another unattainable beauty standard. But
But
wait,
sorry,
tell
yeah,
about her.
go on.
Tell us about Rusorova.
Well, so there are just versions that I have heard where, and I think they're from Norwegian, but they could also be Swedish,
Mm.
where well she will appear, and like we have plenty of folk tales, right, of like encountering beautiful women that didn't turn out to not be so beautiful after all. Like
Oh.
in Denmark, you're if you're out on the Seta with the sheep, typically it's a shepherd, right? He
Mhm.
hangs out there in the pasture at night, and then this beautiful woman comes towards him, and he's like, oh wow, and she's naked and everything, and it's like, oh, this is cool. And then when they're starting to get down to business, so to speak, then he discovers that the back of her is like a tree, or there's like a hole, and that
Oh.
he's like basically making out with a tree. And it's like, guys, what have you been doing? What's going on here?
This is really interesting because that's kind of the inverse of a lot of hunting myths, like La Grande Chasse or Le Chasse de like the hunt of the white deer, and
Hmm.
sovereignty myths that involve the rightful king being willing to sleep with someone who's very, very ugly, a crone or a
Mm.
hag who's usually kind of guarding a well, and
Mm.
she demands a kiss from him, and he goes one step further and actually lays with her. But it turns out that
Oh
she's
wow.
actually this beautiful sovereignty goddess who represents
Ah.
the land, and he's the rightful king because he copulated with her.
Right, right, yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the hunting aspect of that is you're pursuing some kind of white, usually deer. Sometimes it's a
Hmm.
stag, sometimes it's a doe. Doesn't
Yeah.
really matter because it usually turns into a beautiful woman either way.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's only discovered when she's led you into fairyland. Sometimes that's only discovered when you've killed her.
Mm. I
So this
see.
idea of like either a very beautiful woman who turns out not to be so beautiful, or a supernatural or very ugly entity that turns out to be a beautiful woman seems to be very tied in with these traditions. And I
Mhm.
think we can now talk about those big dangly tits of yours that you keep referring to.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would be another figure that seems to fit into this pattern, and I also want to throw a bergtrollet, the mountain troll from the Scandinavian folk song Hermannelig. Where this is it's the scene where this mountain troll is offering a young knight all of these riches, and like, oh, you have all the gold you want, you have this beautiful sword, you have all land between like two different like mythological places, and he but he's like, no, 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 I will not, because you're not a Christian woman, and so therefore goodbye. And then she like I think she ends up exploding or something like that in the very end. Um and I mean that's like an interesting, that sounds like almost like a commentary on exactly those sovereignty
Yeah.
myths, right?
Hmm.
Happening in Scandinavia here in this
Mm.
particular context, which may suggest that there are similar traditions that have been in place out there. Again, referencing Freyr and Gerder
Yes.
and so on. But yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that idea of kind of like being accepted by the land or copulating with the land.
Hmm.
I think that's all very relevant to that. And it's sometimes you get to that, especially in Irish and romantic myths by hunting. So
Mm.
hunting is a very common way to interact with the supernatural, and I think the sovereignty myths that have these very deep traditions of this copulating with the land aspect have kind of gotten tied up with those traditions of going into that through the avenue of pursuing something.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not
Okay.
to bring up the Mabinogi again, but this also happens uh in Pwll Pendevic Divid. I'm sorry, Pwll,
Oh, please.
where
That's going to be haunting me forever.
yeah, it is. But you know what? You're not. I've encountered so many Scandinavians who've also said it that way. So I think it's just a
Really?
blight. Yes.
Okay,
Um,
so it's not just
several,
me. It's like
yeah,
it's how we're
several
taught.
Norwegian. Yeah,
Yes.
I had the same exact horrified reaction when I was in Norway last week, where someone was asking me about Welsh tradition, and they brought up Puttle, and I said, "Not you too." And yeah, but again, he's hunting. He encounters a fairy king and his fantastic dogs, who also appear in Welsh traditions of the Wild Hunt. By the way, these dogs with shining white coats and bright red ears are very, very cool. These kind of like mystical dogs become a big part of the British traditions, especially. And then you get the Irish and Scottish Cuchullain, which are the fairy dogs.
Mm,
But they become a very important element of insular wild hunt traditions. Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, what do we have anything in Nordic mythology that really compares to this? Because once again, Jakob Grimm basically
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, this is like all ancient, deep mythology,"
Yes.
and I'm like, hmm,
I can't think of a story in which specifically hunting is treated in this way, or where there is a real procession that would fit neatly with the traditions. You can kind of pull in things like Odin and the Valkyries by threads of like having to do with death,
hmm.
or processions of the dead, or the other world entities. You can kind of attach it to Freyr and Gerður, so through Skirnismál, if you take the sovereignty myth angle,
Mm.
you might be able to attach it to something with the Einherjar and Valhalla. But again, that's really reaching where there
I
isn't
feel like it is, yeah.
anything.
I mean,
Yeah,
what we've typically seen is like the interpretation of Ragnarök in that
yeah.
context. It's like, but there's no procession. It's
There's
not a
no
not
procession.
like
They say
nothing's.
like they will exit through whatever it is, 540 doors or whatever highly specific
Yeah,
number they have.
yeah.
But
Still
there's
wondering
never
about
a
that one.
description of that. You kind of get this description of, Surtur coming with his flaming sword and
And yeah, the
Naglfar
and we
bringing
got all the
people.
horses there, right? Like Muspel's
Yeah, we have,
sons, at
yep.
least in Snudder's version. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. But there's
But
not a
nothing
real procession
nothing
here.
really comes to mind where there's like a specific pursuit or a specific procession or a specific like entourage that sets out
Hmm.
and would fulfill that.
No.
So yeah, Grimm just really liked the idea of Woden, Wotan, Odin leading the hunt. And I
Hmm.
think it kind of capped everything really neatly for him to tie all of these traditions together,
Yeah,
which,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, and just because it's not like documented in Nordic mythology
Yeah,
doesn't
doesn't
mean
mean
that
that
it.
it wasn't that, and it would
Mm,
not surprise me at all if there were very similar traditions that were contemporary with at the time when a lot of these older myths that we do have evidence for were being observed and composed and kind of existed in day-to-day life.
but
But it, yeah.
what? what's the phenomenology behind this? Like, what is the purpose? What function has this stories like these filled then? Because you say Hutton sort of like suggests that they've come about independently from each other, at least in some
Mhm.
cases. And so
Mhm.
what function in your little world here, if you're, let's say, I don't know, a French farmer or Northern German farmer or Scandinavian farmer or Italian farmer, what 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 can you use it for?
So, several scholars, especially in the Victorian era, really liked the idea that a lot of the British traditions about the Wild Hunt
Oh, I forgot about the Brits.
had to do, yeah, I know you did. That's why I'm here. Don't forget about us. They explained it as stories that arose from the sounds of migrating geese.
Oh.
Because Britain has so many dog-based wild hunt traditions, they have like the yelling hounds, the especially Dartmoor has like demonic hounds, Gabriel hounds, wished hounds. These are all over England and Scotland and Wales.
Hmm.
And it's also where the Sherlock Holmes Hound of the Baskervilles comes from, like this very localized tradition in Dartmoor that has specifically black dogs with glowing eyes.
Oh, that's
But
also
you,
a super Danish thing, by the way.
yes,
The
yeah,
black
it
dog with the
appears in
glowing
other
eyes.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's very
it also
happens a
appears
lot in
in
Denmark.
like very quite early accounts. I think there's a 10th century or 11th century of account in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle of some priest or clergyman who sees a procession of these damned people, and it goes kind of in reversed order from most recently dead to oldest dead, and they're
Hmm.
accompanied by these terrible hounds with like lolling tongues and glowing eyes. And
Oh, that might be where we get actually a connection to something that happens in Nordic mythology, right? Because we do have the description of all the damned who are going
yeah,
to wade the terrible streams of death
yeah,
and
that's
war, right?
actually
Like in
true.
like the build
Yeah.
up to Ragnarok. We
Hmm.
also have a bunch of dogs in
We do have, we've got
Ragnarok.
Garm, we've got,
Yeah.
well, we have Fenris, we
Hmm.
have Geri and Freki, we
Hmm.
have these, a lot of canine and lupine activity as well. That could be another good justification of connection there. But
And
again,
going
it
back to the
feels,
Benandanti, by the way, I mean, that is
yeah.
actually, that has been theorized to be sort of a survival of an ancient European tradition of, well, it's simply a broader concept than of the berserker, right? Like,
Hmm.
so the
Yeah,
berserker,
I've
right, is
seen that
the you've seen
comparison
that
made. Hmm.
suggestion before, yeah.
Hmm.
And yeah, just like for anybody who's confused about our internal references here. Well, so like the berserkir in a Scandinavian context are uh, um, believed to be associated with Odin. These warriors who probably it's most likely done animal skins, primarily bear and wolf skins,
Hmm.
and then take on some kind of persona from there of the animal itself.
Hmm.
And the general idea is that same idea of like riding on your familiar animal
Yeah.
in the Benandanti tradition
Hmm.
seems to be basically a reflection of it, exactly that same idea,
Yeah.
right? That you as a human being through transcendental ritual can morph into or at least take on part of a an animal's functions and shapes,
Hmm.
right? And this is also what we see broadly in the Nordic material. We have the term fylgja, right, which
Yep.
means a familiar of some kind,
Hmm.
basically an quote unquote spirit animal
Yeah.
from a Scandinavian context, right? This animal represents your internal spiritual qualities, right? And it's funny how it's always like the same in the Nordic stuff. It's like always like an eagle, a hawk, a wolf, a
Yeah.
bear, sometimes a bull, and a little bit a stallion once in a while. But that's pretty much
And
it. So we know what kind of animals they
there's
thought were cool.
there's like a boar at some point, I think,
I mean,
or
yeah.
yeah.
So we have, for instance, Hyndluljóð, right? That
Mhm.
where Ottar,
Mm,
this young aristocrat or something like that is turned into a boar, it seems.
yes.
So that could be him having
Yeah.
become his own familiar. Um, and then Freya has like an argument with a Jötun woman called Hindla, which means little dog, which is
Hmm.
also kind of interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you get that a lot. You get that. Well, in Irish tradition, the closest cognate that we have with the idea of a berserker is probably Cuchullain, whose name
Mhm.
means you know, the
Colin's
dog,
dog.
Cullen's dog. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
because he kills Cullen's dog on his because he was late to a feast and Cullen had already set his guard dog out. So he slew
Right.
this amazing dog and he said, "I'm so sorry I killed your dog. I will be your dog until you can get a new one." So
Yeah.
he's the Hound of Cullen. But he undergoes this really interesting transformation that is often translated as warp spasm, but the Irish word is riastradd, where he becomes inhuman, but he's not compared to any animal. He's basically just described as, his mouth opens so wide that you can see his lungs and liver flapping about. His one eye,
Shit.
yeah, it's intense. One eye shrinks to the size of a needle head, and the other grows larger than a dinner plate. And all of
Wow.
his hair stands up so sharply that if apples were to fall on it, they would not reach his scalp because they'd be skewered on his hair. And he bellows so loudly that he shakes the mountains. And then he just tears around in his chariot, like mass killing all of the men of Ulster, or sorry, not the men of Ulster, the men of Connacht.
All right.
And it's yeah, it's pretty violent, but that's often been compared to this idea of berserkers, and it again kind of calls to mind this idea of this ecstatic, uncontrollable state that you see
Mhm.
in so many of these traditions of witchcraft or animal familiars. And the fact that he carries the name of the dog is also really
Mhm.
interesting, and that is a common element in a lot of Irish names as well.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, no, I like that idea. That does sound like it fits quite well with some of those traditions that we have documented in the North as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, so okay, um like it looks like this is like a common theme for Europeans. Like we
Yeah.
yeah, and the Brits are afraid of geese, it sounds
Yeah.
like.
Brits are terrified of geese and dogs, and geese are dogs, and geese are demon dogs.
Right. Yes, makes sense. Perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect
obviously.
sense. Yes. Um, and
Um, the
yeah.
a lot of the more continental stuff does deal with kind of the procession of the dead type things
Mm-hmm.
rather than a host that's actually hunting. Although
Mm,
you do get stories of either hosts that are led by a specific figure, so like Odin, Valdemar. The French have the Erlechan, Elequin tradition,
mm-hmm.
which is basically he's essentially like a landlocked Flying Dutchman, where
Mm.
he's cursed to kind of lead his retinue around because he can no longer return home. So he's a damned king. You do get a lot of these kind of spiritual or otherworldly processions there as well. And you do see that in insular tradition. So they are kind of all mixed up.
Yeah, and what did the
But
Germans call him? Like Erlkönig or something like that, maybe? And
the Elkön, yeah, the Elf King.
yeah.
That's a yeah, Goethe has a really good poem about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, he also lives in a cliff in Denmark, south of
of
Copenhagen.
course he does. Yeah.
Yes, and the Elf King. You know,
Um,
he's the reason that people disappear out there. It's not because they stumble and fall, but
of course
you know,
not.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
there was a an old English maybe in like the 12th century when everyone was trying to be French, they wrote their own version of the Hélican Erlechan myth and they
Hmm.
called it King Herla. And they had this Anglo-Saxon king that was basically cursed with the same problem, but in England.
Oh, of
So
course,
they
yeah.
were, yeah, and that's kind of how that tradition entered English tradition. But yeah, it's really hard to tease out because they are so connected. But I highly doubt that it came from one giant myth
Hmm.
of the wild. And when I say myth, I mean like the one original,
Yeah,
total pure version of that. I
yeah.
think it was kind of it just, things travel, people migrate, traditions are adopted and changed and transformed to fit different localities. And when you do have something like the changing of the seasons, it's not surprising that these things would be tied to seasonal traditions as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, and like for anybody who's listening and like, what is the word that Amina is saying when she says "er"?
Yes. It's
That,
you are.
yes,
It
it is
refers
you
to,
are,
yes,
and
it's
it has its origin in German,
yeah.
from terms like Ursprung, right? The origin of something, and for it has sort of like crept into Scandinavian languages. We use it
Yeah.
a lot in Scandinavia, to basically mean the oldest of old,
Yes,
essentially.
the oldest of old, the original, most unadulterated,
Hmm.
uncorrupted, original, primordial version of something.
Yes, and that was Grimm's theory, right? That all of this material that we can gather now in throughout Europe, it has its origin deep down in that Indo-European
Yeah.
well, right? And so that begs the question: do we find these stories in any kind of way elsewhere in the Eurasian expanse?
Yes. We kind of do.
Oh, do we now?
So, well, we have a lot of traditions of ghostly spirits appearing in the sky
Mhm.
and riding around.
Yeah, you
And we
did
have
mention the
plenty of
Japanese version, right?
Mhm.
And
Yep, we have we
yeah.
have I'm sure there's some African myths as
Mhm.
well of
The
spiritual
Mongols gotta
processions.
have something like this
Yeah,
too,
they
right?
do. They were very, I mean, that's kind of where we get our term for shamanism is from the steppe and that,
Mhm.
Siberian, like northern cold areas.
Mhm.
I know there are myths from indigenous North American traditions as well, and I wouldn't be
Mhm.
surprised if they were also there in Southern American traditions too.
Mhm.
So I think this idea of kind of spiritual procession or demonic procession or procession of the dead is quite widespread, and
Yeah,
it's just
I think that when you dig down into the layers of traditions, pre-Christian traditions throughout cultures, you'll probably find that more or less everybody have this expectation that at some time during the
Mhm.
year, like everybody's gonna come back and say
Yeah,
hi,
exactly.
right?
Or like there was more of a chance of kind of having contact with the other world or the
Hmm.
underworld or the ancestral traditions. So
Hmm.
it's I don't think that every tradition can be crammed into this kind of wild hunt archetype. I think that is kind of limited to Europe
Hmm.
and maybe some of the northern Atlantic territories as well. But I think it is that's kind of a subtype of this larger phenomenon of kind of spiritual arrivals or ancestral processions that we
Hmm.
do see in a lot of other traditions. But
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I'm like totally thinking about what's it called? Spirited Away. Uh,
yeah, where all
um,
of the spirits come out at a certain time and they're all kind of
yeah,
there partying about
yeah, they
and you
gotta
get
get a
abducted.
shower. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you get
And people
abducted.
get spirited away, which is something that
Hmm.
also happens in a lot of wild hunt tales where people
Yeah.
are abducted or they're forced to run with the hunt or they become the prey or they disappear. It's a big thing
Hmm.
in fairies. Well, at some point, we should talk about fairy traditions, fairy folk traditions, and
We
time
should
slips.
we should
Yeah.
absolutely talk about
Mhm.
fairy folk traditions, especially because like
Yep.
there is so much crossover with the Icelandic and Faroese stuff when it
Oh,
comes
yeah.
to that.
You get some really
Um,
fun troll stuff in there, and elves, the
yes.
Alvar, and
Yep.
the
Yep.
Landvættir,
Yeah.
and the hidden folk. Yeah.
And also, did you know that the earliest recorded settler in the Faroe Islands has an Irish name?
I don't think I knew that.
So his name, according to Föringa saga, is Grímur Kampan. And Kampan is an Irish name.
Yeah.
Grímur means the masked one. So it's literally
Mhm.
like unknown Irish guy showed up first.
Anonymous Irish.
Anonymous Irish guy.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. Iceland is full of Irish names.
Oh yeah, no,
Uh,
there's nods to that all over. Like,
yeah.
I mean, obviously, what has happened over time is that the Scandinavian stock of Icelanders have weeded out a lot of the Gaelic
Yeah.
Icelanders, but they're still there
Oh, yeah.
in the subtext here and there, um,
Yes.
below all the Norway veneration that's
Yes,
happening in
exactly.
the
I mean,
literature.
a lot of Gaelic personal names have survived in Iceland, and they pop up throughout all these sagas all over
Hmm.
the place. I mean, even Njála saga, Brennu Njáls saga,
Yeah.
Neil.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. Well,
basically,
Njal,
yeah.
Neil. I think we
Yeah.
say on the Scandinavian side of things, we say that that Neil comes from Njal. So I don't
How
know.
dare you,
How dare you? How
baby.
dare we
Well,
appropriate that?
how dare you
Um,
appropriate this Irish name? But yeah,
but it
there's
is.
so much interchange between Irish and Scandinavian tradition that has kind of populated that kind of like insular Scandinavian North Atlantic
Mhm.
territory part of the world. But
Oh
it's
yeah,
really
for sure.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
like, then you're doing your 23 and Me and you realize you like 7, 8 generations down the line, some Irish guy was involved in
Just-
something. Well, welcome to coastal Scandinavia.
yeah, truly. Yeah, it was all over the shop. I could talk about that all day because that's what I'm writing my dissertation on.
That is true. Yeah, and that's a subject that we need to talk about too at some point. We
Good.
gotta get into those network theories and how Scandinavians and the Gaelic populations seem to have interacted in the Irish Sea.
Yes.
Definitely want to hear about that at some point in
Excellent.
the
Well,
future.
I'd be happy to pontificate on that topic.
And on that note, maybe this is the time to wrap up, so to speak.
Yes.
We are not 100% certain what our next topic is going to be,
Mhm.
if there will be a guest joining us. We are still in a bit of a planning phase with some of those things, but we have a couple of things in the works.
But if
Um,
there are any topics that you're curious about, feel free to
mhm.
comment or send us a message on social media or comment on YouTube. I think you can comment on Spotify. I'm not sure about
You
other
can,
platforms.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but we're always happy to look at some suggestions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's a very good thing to mention, right? You can reach us on Instagram, you can reach us
Mhm.
on Blue Sky, you can reach us on YouTube, you can reach
Mhm.
us on TikTok. Amina, you're
TikTok.
running the
Yep.
TikTok.
I'm running
I
the
Yeah,
TikTok.
I put Amina in charge of the TikTok because like
Yeah.
I'm too old for that stuff.
Whatever. I'm
And then
too old for that stuff.
and then you can, of course, also sign up to support us on Patreon so that Amina, as this poor student, can eat. Um,
Yes, feed me, please.
uh, that might be
Oh.
hyperbole, but yeah, all of the proceeds from Patreon goes to running this podcast and making sure that we can do the things that we do. So I do hope that if you think that what we're doing is awesome,
Mhm.
you want to support us for about $10, 10
Yes,
US
and
dollars these days. I
thank
don't know
you
what that
to
is in other
everyone who's already
currencies.
subscribed on Patreon. We really
Yes,
appreciate the support. It helps immensely.
it really
And
does. Yeah.
yeah, thanks for
Yeah,
joining
and
us.
And speaking of that too, we also have started the pre-releases of next podcast episodes on Patreon, so you get them earlier there.
Mm.
Um, so that's a little cool feature. But yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Amina, for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Of course. Thank you, Matthias, for taking time out of your busy schedule to let me prattle on about the Wild Hunt.
Yes, I mean, we could keep going forever, but we got to save a little
Easily.
bit
We
for
have to
future
we have
episodes.
to keep them wanting more. Yeah. Anyway.
Yes, and that's a wrap, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.